takes power? What happens when she won't back down? What happens when a woman takes power? What happens? What happens? What happens when a woman takes power?
Good morning, DeNora Getachew. Welcome to the Magnolias. I am wildly enthusiastic about this precious time with you to learn more about what inspires you personally and professionally. DeNora is a lawyer and a democracy advocate with a focus on strengthening and inspiring the leadership of young people who are eager to make a difference and raise their civic voices to do good. She's also been honored as a superhero by Citizens Action as an everyday hero for her dedication to creating an accessible, inclusive, equitable, and representative democracy. She's a mother of three, 9, 11, and 25 years old. She's eclectic. She ran her beloved New York City Marathon and loves New York City bagels. And she swam with sharks in French Polynesia and loves cotton candy. I can only relate to the bagels, DeNora. And I'd just like to start with your personal story. I mean, where you grew up, what about your younger self created the values that you hold dear and drives you to want to make a difference? Where did that come from?
Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you today. It's always great to be in conversation with women who are excited about changing the world, but also about, investing in and fueling other women leaders to do the same. And so thank you for this opportunity to be a part of the podcast and the conversation today. And I would say, if I'm being most honest, on a Monday morning, I missed my call from my mother this morning. I called her and then she called me back and the day had already started. So I'll have to squeeze her in later. But she, first and foremost, is the person who instilled in me this notion of being of service and really thinking about how to fuel or pour into a community. My mom grew up in Alabama and New York and came to New York at a very different time in our society's history, kind of came of age, if you will, during the civil rights era and really found her own voice in New York City after having left a very segregated South, right? And what did that mean for her and her formative experiences really shaped how she parented myself and my siblings, always teaching us the importance of resilience and the importance of believing in yourself and the importance of community. And so those values were set with me at a very early age. And I would say really shaped the woman that I'm proud to be today. Still a work in progress, but it definitely kind of anchored me to who I am. So I'm DeNora Getachew. I am a native New Yorker. And as you said, a mother of three, including a son who I had as a senior in high school. I didn't know the words growing up necessarily of activist or advocate. I knew what it meant to be a citizen. I knew what it meant to register to vote. I knew what it meant to take a stand for things you believed in, but I didn't have the perfect bow to put on what that is until later on. And do you want me to keep going into my story? How deep do you want me to go? Good, keep going.
Well, I'd love to know how many siblings and where you are in the lineup and what that meant for you.
Oh, so fun. So I call myself an oldest youngest. So I'm the youngest of many. So I have three sisters from my mom, and then two brothers from my dad. And I'm the youngest of all of them, but I always grew up believing in my heart that I was the oldest. So I was the sibling who always had something to say and the sibling who always wanted to be the convener, the organizer, kind of bring people together. And so I fit in that lineup as the youngest. My closest sibling is 12 years older than me, and it kind of steps up from there. Yeah.
So you're an old soul.
Yeah, I am very much. I mean, I grew up with older siblings who were, we're not going to treat me like the youngest. And so they're like, let's go. We've got to do the things. And so I grew up quickly before my years, if you will. And what that meant for me, though, is that I always had individuals in my life who had perspective to share on things that I didn't fully understand and could shape and mold me. As it relates to my sisters, I felt like I had, 3 extra mothers, right? So I was like, who's in charge? Which one of you gets to put out the final directive that I should follow? And grew up in Yonkers in the Bronx and have lived in New York my entire life. As I was saying, I cut my teeth really in thinking about what it means to be an activist and advocate when I was a senior in high school, made a choice to have a child at a young age. And that had a huge impact on my life decisions from that moment forward. As you can anticipate, as a young woman from the Bronx, right, I could become another footnote of a stereotype and a statistic of what not to do, or as has been hopefully the driving force for me throughout my life, really fight to avoid that stereotype and that statistic. And, at the time when I was a pregnant teen, again, didn't know that what it meant to be an activist or an advocate, but what I knew was that my high school here in Harlem, where I attended, thought that my pregnancy was a distraction to the school community, that it was maybe even contagious or something you could get in the water. And so there was a big push to encourage me to transfer to an alternative high school for pregnant girls. Fun fact about me is that I'm a rule follower, right? So I like structure, respect process. And so I was like, well, let's go visit that alternative high school for pregnant girls. What I quickly learned is that while that school could afford me childcare, it couldn't afford me a rigorous academic experience. So I launched my first advocacy campaign as a 16-year-old teen to be able to push for educational equity and opportunity for myself, which hopefully had a, cascading effect on others who were similarly situated. Quickly learned and tried to understand the bureaucracy that is the New York City public school system and how I could appeal that recommendation. Fortunately for me, was successful because of my mom and having a champion beside me who said, if this is what you want to achieve, we're going to do it. We're going to make sure that we can provide you with all the support you need to be successful, but you have to want it more than anyone else wants it. And you have to work hard for that. Ended up graduating on time with honors with my peers at that Harlem-based high school and going on to college and law school thereafter. My son now is, the math works. He's 25 years old. And it's funny because right in hindsight, I thought, oh, well, when he's 25, I'll only be 42 and I'll be so young. And now when I'm 42, I'm like, am I still so young? Like, do I think I'm so young?
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate that. When you run a nonprofit that's focused on young people and civic activism, you don't feel as young as Gen Z and my Gen Alpha children. But I do still feel younger than 42 may state. And so it's exciting to reflect back on that time in my life and how that kind of shaped the road and the work that I've dedicated my life to, right? I'm grateful that I've been able to pursue a career where I can sit at the intersection of creating a democracy and society that's more accessible, inclusive, and reflective of all of us, while also really thinking about how do young people fit into that equation and how do we create the conditions for young people to be the shepherds and stewards of that society that we're building. So I'll pause there. I feel like I've said a lot.
Well, is there a particular incident or string of incidents that prepared you best for being the so-called old person leading these young people to shape their values and their voices?
I think one of the things that shaped me best was I'm always clear about the young person that I once was and what were some of the barriers and obstacles that either were very clear to me or weren't, right? That shaped who I am today. And how do I create space? And I enjoy telling my own story because I want every young person to hear it and to see glimmers of hopefully themselves in that, of like, there is opportunity, there is the ability to be self-effective if you are clear about, one, your own personal why, like what motivates you to do the things you do, and two, that you are enough, right? So there's the kind of grounding in self, if you will. I think what also has prepared me to be the older person running a nonprofit focused on young people leading change is all of the roles and experiences and opportunities that I've gained over the last 20 years as an adult professional, starting even with my law school experience, and really, one, going to law school and getting that foundational understanding of how to use the law as a tool to affect change, right? And that set of analytical reasoning and skills that allow me to understand the law, right? And process how can we use the law to better improve societal conditions and drive towards that more reflective democracy, if you will. I think also what keeps me grounded, and this to me is the most important part, is the now, and like, how do we anchor ourselves in this moment as we navigate an intersectional reckoning, as young people are clear and unapologetic about transformative change? How can I best be a vehicle and a resource to help achieve that, knowing that young people are not a monolith, so we need to be proximate to those young people and hear from them about what's motivating them to do the work they're doing, right? And how can we, all of us as collective kind of resident older people than them use the resources at our disposal to help fuel that passion, that energy, that fervor they have for that change.
You know, I'm sure that a lot of young people are experiencing so much despair given the state of democracy and climate crisis and racial reckoning. There's just so much that can be paralyzing. But the young people who come to do something with their sleeves rolled up, how would is there a general description of what these kids are like in terms of not feeling despair or anger, or do they? What propels them? What motivates them?
I think like all of us, right? It varies from day to day, right? It isn't just the despair and anger as much as it is about the promise and opportunity, right? And so on any given day, we wake up with whatever is our individual formula that matches the moment and matches where we are 2 years into the pandemic that won't quit. And I think what's powerful is to hear all of those stories, right? And what motivates young people, because they aren't a monolith, right? I think the work that DoSomething does as one of the largest nonprofits focused on young people and change, the work that we do to really educate young people about causes and create this opportunity for them to get engaged and really change the world is so powerful. And yet what makes it relevant is that young people aren't a monolith, and that there's going to be opportunities for young people to engage on the causes most important to them, and then to really think about how we as an organization, as well as us as a society, can fuel that engagement long term, right? Like if we're driving young people to be the stewards, the citizens, and I mean citizens in the broadest sense of the word, who will shepherd this society forward, the way to really understand what that takes and what they need is to know young people from various backgrounds, from various perspectives, and think about how we can help them each find their own version of change, if you will. DoSomething over the last, has 28 years of history in this regard, and really was started by co-founders Andrew Shue and Michael Sanchez with the very, very noble and important goal of like, how do we just get young people to get off the sidelines and do something, right? Pun intended and not at the same time.
It's such a great brand.
Such a great brand. I'm like, never changing the name. We're doing something all the time. And I think the notion of doing something circa 1993 is very different than the notion of doing something in 2021, right? And so our work has to continue to evolve and iterate to meet the moment with young people at the center. And so that's the work that I've been doing over the last 9 months at DoSomething, is really getting a chance to re-know the brand, right? And I knew DoSomething kind of adjacent to the work I had done historically, but to be at the helm of this 28-year-old organization in this moment where we're navigating young people and their passion for change, we're navigating a pandemic that has exacerbated inequities across the board, right? And where we're really trying to build the future of our society is so powerful, and yet at times daunting, because we're like, how do you anchor yourself in a world that feels perpetually evolving and perpetually changing? And for me, that work has to start first and foremost with what we're hearing from young people. Can we understand the pulse of not just our members, right? We have, millions of young people who call themselves DoSomething members, but really of a generation that's coming of age in this moment, right? Like, what does it take for us to not only meet the moment, but help continue to build an organization that's enduring beyond this moment?
I am a huge fan of DoSomething in terms of the initiatives, what it's accomplished in the past. I'm wondering if you have a favorite in terms of, what attracted you to lead the organization, and then in terms of your goal of meeting the moment and how things need to evolve, what your vision is for the future.
Such great questions on a Monday. I'm glad I had the coffee already.
Me too.
I think so much of my work from law school to this moment was in the core work of what does it mean to strengthen our democracy, to make sure that we were eliminating structural barriers to participation and really creating a pathway for all Americans to participate in democracy, right? So you think about that in the sense of campaign finance reform and creating small donor public financing systems and automatic voter registration, restoring the right to vote for returning citizens. And I realized, 6-7 years ago, even if we did all of that work, if people, but especially young people, didn't understand why it mattered to participate in society and democracy, it would be for naught. And so I was able to pivot slightly to really incorporate more civic participation work into my own mission statement and how I wanted to lead in my career. And so I always knew of DoSomething and its work because it does. It has this larger than life brand, right? Of being in conversation and community with young people. And when the opportunity presented itself to consider being the new CEO, I was like, who, me? Right? Like, how did that happen? And I am a big believer that there are spaces and places you're supposed to be at certain moments in your life. And I am unequivocally clear I'm supposed to be sitting here at DoSomething, even though I resisted it along the way, right? So like the role came up and someone would send it to me and I go, oh, I don't know, is that for me? Because DoSomething had this big brand and public sense of how it engaged with young people. And I didn't know if I had what it takes or took to be a part of the I'm being honest, right? And I think it's important for all of us to name as women and women leaders that imposter syndrome is real no matter what in your career.
Crazy, but true.
Crazy, but true. And so I talk publicly about it. And maybe my colleagues may not appreciate that, but it's honest, right? And so the lawyer in me was prepared and I kept doing my diligence and asking the questions and having the conversations, all the while thinking like, is really me? Am I a true contender for this role? And once I got to the organization, it became even clearer why my leadership was necessary in this moment. So DoSomething's kind of core competency is creating cause engagement and awareness for young people on a broad spectrum of causes, everything from education to climate justice and gun violence and you name it in between. And while that engagement, that our awareness raising is relevant, important, there's so much more, right? And I think what meeting this moment means for DoSomething, for me, for young people, is knowing that there's also so much more that can be done beyond just the education, kind of the introduction to causes. And so my vision for this work is about that. Like, how do we equip young people with the tools, the resources, the know-how to actually have a systemic impact on the causes they care about? Again, I will say this wholeheartedly, young people are not a monolith. So I don't believe that every young person who comes to DoSomething is going to become an advocate right at the end of the journey. But many of our young people want to be a part of that journey. And how do we create ladders of engagement for them that allow them to go deeper on the causes they care about, especially when we know that in this moment, young people have they have a phone, right? They can Google or search up any of the information they need to have or want to have. And so DoSomething's place is not what it was 20 years ago to educate young people about the issues. It's that, and how do we get them to understand the root cause of why those issues are issues and how they can have an impact on those in a meaningful and intentional way. And if we are doing our work intentionally and with purpose, that we've created a true collective of young people who know that they are working together towards that change, right? So DoSomething has historically operated in a way in which our members are operating in silos, right? Like they're doing kind of, I jokingly talk about it as a mother, parallel play, right? Like they're all doing their actions together, but they're adjacent to each other. What does it mean in the next iteration of our work for us to build this collective of young people who know that I am a part of something larger than myself? We are all moving this work together. That I trust that if someone is a DoSomething member, it means something to me, it means something to society, and that we have a shared set of identities and perspectives that are pushing us to do this work. Part of our work can be in this moment, figuring out how to, through that collective, diffuse this astronomical, kind of off the charts level of polarization we see in America, right? Mm-hmm. So how do we bring young people together across areas of difference to help them see the bigger picture, the forest for the trees, as the old law school adage goes? And how do we think then about, if we can do that core work, educating and equipping young people to see causes and to see their ability to be change agents with this collective of people who are doing that work together, are we going to change outcomes in society because of that with these young people? Will we see that young people feel more equipped to, engage in civic actions, have a better understanding about society and how they can contribute to it in ways that are not just about kind of the self, but really about the us and the now? And I think that's it's a huge effort, right? Like we're on the precipice of a new strategic plan that embeds that. You're getting kind of the preview of the vision and the plan. What does it mean to do something to really step into that space and make a difference that way?
I know that you're in this moment of doing a strategic planning, which is very intense. I mean, are there parts of it that you feel like you can share in terms of how it's evolving and what your dreams are?
So you got to hear it. That's it, right? Like that's how it's evolving. And the biggest dream I have is like in 3 to 5 years, what does it mean for DoSomething to have started to build that collective? How do we have young people who are like, I am a DoSomething member, I am a part of this work? Because now, you ask some DoSomething members and they might say, oh yeah, I think there's a membership, I think I'm a part of it, but not all of them. How does that become a household name and brand again in the way that is centered with young people is most important to me? How do we really live into a new mission statement that's focused on not just activating young people, but really fueling young people to change the world in the ways that are most important and on the issues that are most pressing to them? That requires us to really reorient how we do the work to center young people. And I think many nonprofits say that they center young people. To live that out every day, it takes a lot of work, a lot of intentionality, and a lot of focus. And I'm excited about that next phase of the work because that's what brought me here. Notwithstanding all the imposter syndrome and like, really me? I'm here because I believe in the power of young people, right? We have seen it in various moments in history, and at all kind of intersections, we see young people leading the movement for change. What does it mean for us to truly uplift, amplify, and kind of honor young people for being courageous, resilient, and pressing for change?
I love hearing about how you're amplifying their voices in a collaboratory that, taking them out of their silos and understanding the power of of the network that they can be together. It's really inspiring. And we want to walk alongside you in this work. And I'd like to open it up to others. I know everybody has questions. Jump in.
I'd love to ask DeNora a question. DeNora, it's fascinating, your work. You really bring it alive as you speak to it, and specifically your strategic plan. I grew up in a different culture. I grew up in India, and there's a different mindset there. It's less about individualism and more about community. Mm-hmm. And especially now, when I see what's going on with Instagram and Facebook, it's so self-oriented. And what I love about what you're speaking to is the notion of turning it on its head. I also see what's going on with Instagram and young women, and how things are getting out of control in terms of images, and how young women misperceive the message they're getting. And so for you to step in and say, let's create a community, let's come together for something that gives us meaning, something greater than whom we are as individuals. Let's create a purpose. It's almost countercultural to social media. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Ooh, big questions. So, in my former work, and thank you so much for that question. In my former work before DoSomething, I spoke a lot about slacktivism and what it means to create young people who are operating in these silos and really, with all due respect to the tech sector, I believe fundamentally in technology as a tool that can help accelerate movements and bring people together in intentional and collaborative ways. But I think at its most extreme, it is exactly what you've described. It's creating those silos. It's breaking us apart. It's making it easier for us to other ourselves as opposed to thinking about what binds us and what brings us together. But when I got to DoSomething, I was so afraid to talk in that voice because I felt like it was contrary to our work, because so much of our work is about this online platform where young people come and they get engaged and they can convene, but we haven't brought that to them, right? So like it's happening slightly organically, but not at scale. And so I often felt like I can't talk about slacktivism. I can't talk about some of the ills of technology and how that might make it harder for us to be in community, because it felt like there was a real tension there. And then I heard young people saying it, right? I heard our members say, I don't always engage in social media and use technology because I know about some of the deleterious impacts of it. And it kind of freed me up to be able to speak more authentically about how to combat some of those ails and ills. I think the challenge for us in this moment, and it's so interesting, right? Because I keep thinking, when are we going to get out of the great pandemic that won't quit, right? Like every week, I feel like I come up with a new mantra for the week to help fuel me along. Fun fact about me, I'm not only a cotton candy and bagel loving New Yorker, but I'm an extrovert. Like, I'm supposed to be out in the world. I'm supposed to be with people, right? And so 2 years of like the people only in this house who I love dearly has been a lot, right? And every moment where we try to like re-enter society, it feels like COVID pushes us back. And I then keep telling myself, well, what are we supposed to be learning? Like, what's our COVID clarity? Because the reason we're in this moment is to get clearer, recalibrate about why we're doing the things we're doing and to what end. And so then I think about that in the context of your question. I think we kind of went off the deep end, right? Like, and interestingly, the pandemic pushed us in some respects off the deep end as it related to technology and social media, because we were trying to use it as a vehicle to create community when there wasn't the ability to convene in person. And I think we have to recalibrate that, right? And young people are clear. They've been saying it. We just haven't always been listening. Like, what does it mean? It's not a zero-sum game all the time. And I think we've become a society where it's all or nothing. Like, either you're canceled or you're in. It's like, well, couldn't it be that there are ways to iterate on what we're doing? And how do we move the spectrum back from the extreme over here, closer to an equilibrium in the middle? I think there will be a reckoning as it relates to the role that these platforms play in our society, in the way that we convene, kind of back to their original purpose of like using them for good. And so I want to be a part of how we can reset that dynamic and hear from young people, you know, when those platforms are operating at their best as it relates to how they perceive it for them, what's the value they see, and then how do we use that to push towards kind of the reset for those platforms. I don't think we can't put the genie back in the bottle, right? So we're not going to go back to a society where there's not these platforms, but how are we best using them for good has to be a part of the conversation.
That's great. I'm wondering, is there any kind of recalibration within your own family in terms of having young children during this pandemic that goes on and on and on?
On and on and on. You know, so I have 9 and 11-year-old daughters, and we were pre-pandemic, we were a family even where technology access was very limited. And then it became their lifeline to their peers, right? And so how to thread the needle of, you're not having in-person conversations, you're not seeing other children on a regular basis outside of school, became the new North Star, right? And like, I think even for us, there are ways for us to recalibrate how we interact as a family. So what I love most and my biggest takeaway from this time is focusing more on my family, right? I think as a New Yorker, and I say this with all the love in my heart for New York, we are a fast-paced city. So there's the events and the social and the work, and everybody's got, you know, this nagging desire to outperform other people as it relates to who's the most productive. It's like, is that success? I don't know if I'm, you know, on any given day, I have to be the most productive person. I have to be my best self. And so I loved and have appreciated that the pandemic has forced us to really look inwards and focus on what are the things we're doing and why, right? So early on in the pandemic, I was like, there are lots of things I'm not going to do anymore, right? That's not relevant to me. It's not important to me. It's taking me away from my family, which is important to me. And so I love that for 2 years straight, I've had dinner with my children almost every night, right? Yeah. I didn't do that before, just candidly. There was always something else. I'm supposed to be somewhere else, I'm supposed to do something else. And it's like, or you should just be here, right? I think in the whatever comes after this period, there'll be some recalibration of that, but having it clear that that's a priority for our family matters. I also think even in a, you know, that our children have had more technology access than we would have anticipated, and now beginning to bring them back into the in real life world, right? Like creating more opportunities for them to be in person with their peers and play like 9 and 11-year-old girls should play is important for us. while still making clear, like my husband jokingly will be like, oh, you're such a Luddite. And I was like, that's not it, right? I just think that there are components of this that are not developmentally appropriate without the right anchors and guideposts. And that's our job as parents. And so how do we make sure that our children are not Luddites, but also that they are living and comporting themselves in a developmentally appropriate way is what I'm constantly grappling with. I don't want them to feel socially ostracized, but I don't want them to feel like they've got to lean in aggressively to all of this social media and some of the norms that have developed as a result of that.
Yeah, the
That is
constant pinging. Anne has a question for you.
Of course.
Yes, first an observation listening to you speak about social media. It's refreshing, especially as someone who's working so much with young people. But I am reminded how society has conflated the tool with the mission or purpose. You know, it's like the tool becomes the mission. Oh, we have to connect up, but you have to ask, well, why? What are we doing together? As opposed to being distracted by something clever like a social media platform or tool. I think the same thing happens with facts versus explanations. You know, people conflate those two things in society right now, hence, well, what is a fact versus my belief? So it's like how to kind of bring people back to the most important questions, which is what do we know is going on and what do we believe or want our purpose to be? So it's kind of a nice reminder. But my big question for you is in bringing the community together of young people in terms of action and shared purpose, what's the piece for you that is most fuzzy right now? What's the piece that's like less clear in how you make that magic happen?
Mm-hmm. You know, I think the hardest part is rebuilding trust with young people, right? Like we became a company that had so many tentacles in so many different places and so many relationships and earned trust in the nonprofit and for-profit sectors that we weren't as close or as proximate, to use my favorite Brian Stevenson phrase, to young people. My North Star every day is how do I get more proximate to young people and hear from them how we should be doing this work, knowing that it's not going to be, I can't do all of the things that young people want me to do, right? So it's about being clear in our communications with young people and being honest about the growth path that we're on and how we are here to learn from them and with them. But that's going to take work to build, right? So even as we're going through the strategic planning process, there's lots of, can we actually build a collective? What does that mean? What will that feel like? And I don't, like at a broad level, I understand what it feels like until we start having those conversations with young people, that collective in quotation marks is going to evolve. And so that feels hardest to me to like anchor myself in. Like, I know that there are millions of young people who we can communicate with and can be in conversation with. They are not a monolith and don't want the same thing from us, don't come to do something with the same thoughts in mind. How do we begin to get closer to them and hear from them, kind of take out some of the themes we're hearing that helps us build that collective that in a youth-centered way, but also pushes us to not create an echo chamber. Like, I don't want us to be an echo chamber for one voice, one perspective of young people. You know, science and data really tells us that young people, especially as they're younger, skew more kind of partisan liberal. DoSomething does not exist. I do not want us to exist to be an echo chamber for partisan liberal ideals of young people. And so therefore there is a tension for us of like, how do we build that space that is going to be more inclusive and more reflective of young people writ large? How do we get into the corners of America where we haven't historically had a presence, where a young person doesn't know what it means to be a volunteer, let alone an activist, and begin to have some of those authentic and organic conversations, knowing full well and with complete respect, right? There's always this tension between kind of national, local, grassroots, that we are not here to supplant or step on the toes of organizations that have been doing that work in community way longer than DoSomething. And so are there ways that our work as this online activation hub and platform can be value additive to what's happening locally rather than supplanting or taking the place of that work. And that is a very delicate line to balance. And so, my answer is two parts. One is like, what does this collective look like? How do we build it in a way that really does center young people? And then in order to do that, how do we develop relationships with those who are proximate to young people and understand the roles that we all play in helping fuel young people to change the world?
Yeah, again, you're double clicking on collaboration as a theme here, which, we all revere in terms of, how can we work across these different divides to be more effective? Darcy, I know you have a question.
I do. This has been fascinating. And I love the question that you asked. What are we supposed to be learning right now? That has been one of my go-to questions at periods of my life where it's like, what am I doing right now? What am I supposed to be learning? And, not just waiting for that next step. But you've sparked something in me that I don't think I've ever thought about before. One of the reasons that the Magnolias exist is to really help, and you said amplify the voice of youth. We want to amplify the voice of women and help galvanize these partnerships so that we can collectively address the most complex issues we have in the world. And, that's in part a response to generations, if not centuries, of living in a patriarchal society and what that has brought us. And one of our guests once said that the Sustainable Development Goal number 5, gender equity, is really the booster goal for all the other goals, achieving all the other sustainable development goals. And what you've got me thinking is maybe this next generation of youth, how do girls and boys walk alongside each other versus, we're fighting for the voice of women, but at some point, how might that be an equal platform for leadership? So and I still think we're in the work of amplifying women's voices and women's leadership. It's time for that now. But I see on the horizon, maybe there is a time when it's an equitable leadership.
That is the work of this more, right? It's interesting. So I have 2 young daughters and an older son, and we often talk about in our house, like, what does it truly mean to be a feminist, right? And not in a, like, I'm going to put a label on myself and I'm going to pat myself on the back, I'm so great, but actually to change our behavior and our patterns of practice in ways big and small that truly embody what it means to be a feminist. And I think we're having a hard time with that as society, right? I think even about the 2 million women who left the workforce, I was one of those women, right? Like, I sat on the sideline and thought, what I can do the most important thing I need to be doing in this moment. So October, I don't even know where I am right now, October of 2020 till April of 2021, I was home with my children, focusing on nurturing, educating, and loving on them as we navigated this difficult time. Many women left the workforce, 2 million of them, right, to be exact. Some of them haven't returned yet, right, because society has not calibrated to create space for them. I just read an article this weekend about childcare and the lack thereof, right, and that women can't re-enter the workforce if they are the primary childcare providers, and those who work in the childcare industry are having their own COVID clarity moment, that they maybe don't want to be doing that work anymore. Or, I'm now allowed to publicly talk about it. My colleagues used to say, like, stop talking about this great salary reconciliation, DeNora, but that's what it is, right? Like, part of it is we need to adjust wages in America to really value the people who provide key infrastructure and support for our society to operate, and not just think of those roles as like in the shadows. And so it's interesting because we're in this moment where it's all coming to a head. So I always talk about like intersectional. The reckoning is not just about Black liberation or equity. It's not just about gender equity. It's not just about disability and able-bodiedness. It's about all of those things and how we kind of come to each and every table as our full and whole selves, and that we stop pitting ourselves against each other in this fight for equity, right? I feel like when we talk about, I give my example in the 2008, I was like, what year was this? Geez, in the 2008 election, right? I was sitting here thinking, am I a Black person first or am I a woman first? I don't know the answer to that question, right? And we all had to make hard choices. That shouldn't be the choices that we're forced to make, because that means that the choice you don't make is the group that could potentially get left behind, right? And so I think what's so inspiring about young people in this moment is talking about that intersectionality in a way that brings us more together as opposed to keeping us siloed and apart. But it's a hard moment to be doing any of this work because it feels constantly about the trade-off, right? And who's not gaining if someone else is gaining, which is even
competition versus collaboration.
exactly right. I again, we're going to have to prioritize. So I'm not saying that we get to have it all once we collaborate. We will have to prioritize, and I think that's the harder thing for Americans to do because we want it all, and young people in particular right now are unequivocal about wanting it all and wanting it now, right? Like I say, as a Gen X woman, I am here for the incremental change. I'm here, like, let's just build up, right? Like, imagine what it took for, the 72 years that women in the shadows or publicly or were advocating for the 19th Amendment until they actually got it, right? So I get it that it takes a long time to affect change. It's faster now because of technology and social media. The flip side is like, well, we can't have it all right now. So like, what are the things we need to lay the groundwork on in order to get the bigger and bigger wins over time? And so how do you hold those tensions together, right? Of like immediate and instant and transformative change, and that you can't have it all today, right? I feel like I spend a lot of my time, back to the former question, as a parent, teaching my kids about instant gratification. And I'm like, you can't have all of the things you want right now. Just because the food could show up if I press these buttons doesn't mean that every facet of life works that way. And so I think there's some level of re-norming for ourselves what it takes to be change agents and resilient as we push for the change we're seeking. Because we've gotten to a place where it all feels so extreme, so urgent, so pressing that we kind of lose the forest for the trees.
DeNora, if I can tap into your resilience, you have this reputation as a superhero, officially a marathoner, leading millions of young people. What do you do for self-care? Do you have a reflective practice? What do you do so that you can take good care of yourself, so that you can do this work?
I will say to you in all candor, I am really bad at the self-care. And it's funny, just my first call
You're a
this
woman.
morning, there was a whole conversation in my first meeting this morning that was about everybody stop telling mothers that they need to engage in self-care, but then guilting them when they do it, right? Because there's this notion that like, aren't you being productive? Have you done the things yet? So a couple of things that I've gotten better at doing. One is even though I've run a marathon, I'm a really good sprinter. So I love the chase of like a short deadline of like, if I just get to this thing, I could do it. That's not healthy. That's not sustainable, right? Especially without some of the anchors of the former time where you could have that outlet where you could just unplug and take a break. This has been 2 years of like monotony, the same, all, without some of those anchors. And so it's been harder to sprint in the middle of a pandemic, literally and metaphorically. So I've had to really carve out space for myself and be clear about, what are the things that bring me the most joy? So puzzling brings me a lot of joy. I've finished a puzzle this weekend. That was like I started it right before the new year and hadn't had as much time to like lean into it. And it was like nagging at me. You see it on the table and you're like, finish the puzzle. Well,
How many pieces?
1,000?
Yeah.
So the snowstorm gave me some time to unplug and focus on finishing the puzzle with my children. So there's puzzling, there's, taking time out for working out and physical activity and making sure that I'm creating those spaces for just me, whether it's first thing in the morning or, before dinner time. I think, as I mentioned earlier, really focusing again on family, being kind of centering my family, especially my young children, in what it means for me to show up as a mother is self-care for me, because that wasn't my practice in the same way pre-pandemic, but also equipping my children to know self-care for me means sometimes I'm not with you, right? So even if it means I'm sitting in a room by myself and you don't get to call mom, like, and I don't respond, that's self-care, whether that's 10 minutes or 2 hours. And I think naming that for myself and giving myself permission to be vulnerable in that way has been a huge game changer during this pandemic. And it's definitely what I'm taking forward. Last but not least, I think, and this is where last week, every week I've been coming up with my new mantras. Last week's mantra was that COVID was oppressing me because it was just stopping me from living my life. I kind of have put my life on pause, and it's like, you kind of take one step out and you're like, am I allowed to do that thing? Can I go outside and see real people and maybe not get COVID and, whatever. And I realized that that's not a healthy way to live my life, because I'm an extrovert who needs the people. I'm fueled by others. And so how do I create more space to be with the people I love, right? And not feel like I'm always, like COVID's always kind of hanging over me, if you will. That's a newer one. So I'm working on that. Come back to me in a few months. I'll let you know if it's actually working. And I think hopefully winter ending in New York will help with that for sure.
Well, we'll be rooting for you. I want to close with the questions that we ask all of our guests. And the two questions are, what are 3 calls to action that anyone can do?
Such a great question. And, I would say this work that we're doing to really create the next phase for DoSomething and really think about our society and the place that young people fit in it is not work that is, is not going to happen overnight. It's not going to be wrapped up in a bow so quickly. And so how do we think about this as a marathon here too, right? And so, as I think about the opportunity to be in this conversation and with this community, the things that are jumping out to me as a call to action for this group are join our movement to really equip young people to change the world, right, on the issues that are most pressing to them by investing in our work and really helping fuel long-lasting change for the next generation. I'm also asking us all to talk more about youth activism in the same way that you would talk about any other cause over your dinner conversation. I think we're often afraid of fully acknowledging and embracing this moment that we're living in and the pulsing desire that young people feel for change. We have to begin to normalize that for ourselves if we're really going to create space and vehicle for young people to be a part of shepherding our society forward. And so help us all lift up and amplify youth voices as relevant and credible. Not perfect, right? Because that's work that I'm constantly doing, is to talk about, we all are on a journey to learn, young people included. And so let's be clear about that. But let's really talk about youth activism as not a flash in the pan, but really a part of our society in the same way we do other conversations. And then last but not least, I would ask us all to think about how we can introduce DoSomething to friends and colleagues that care about young people and really, really care about how young people can make a positive change on our society. I think, again, if we're truly going to have a world that is inclusive, accessible, and reflective of all of us, and with my own version, really with young people at the center, we've got to do more work to center and amplify youth voices.
Well, we are eager to support these future leaders because that is the future. And so the work that you're doing is really vital. And the last thing is just, what advice you would specifically give to young girls who want to make a difference?
The advice I'd give to young girls is, grounded in the advice I wish someone had given to me when I was a young girl, and the advice I give to my 2 young daughters, which is, I want you to be curious, impatient, inquisitive, and clear about the change you want to see in the world. I want you to be collaborative. I want you to bring people together to achieve that change. And I want you to know that change is possible once you've kind of built that coalition of the willing, if you will. But know that it is an instant and that it is going to take work, and that in order to accomplish that, there are people, old people, who want to fuel you to lead change, but that you also have to be patient about achieving it. And that's hard, right? Because when you are idealistic and passionate, you want it all and you wanted it yesterday. And it's incumbent upon all of us to realize the role we play in achieving that change and being at it for the long haul. So take breaks, right? I like to say democracy is a full contact sport. That doesn't mean you play in the sport every day. Find the ways that you can play in the sport in a way that aid your mental health and aid your desire to see change, but know that it's okay to take a step back and take a break and sit on the bench sometimes too.
DeNora, this has been so inspiring, energizing, activating. We do want to walk alongside you in this mission to do something. And so thank you so much for spending this time with us. I have to apologize because I mispronounced your name also, which I was mortified about. It's Getachew?
Getachew.
Getachew. Okay,
Yep.
thank you. I will not make that mistake again. Getachew. Thank
DeNora, sorry, could you just share your website and how people can find you?
Absolutely. So you can find us at DoSomething.org. We are excited to have you join our movement to equip young people to change the world. And we hope that you will come there and learn more. If you are a young person, get engaged in some of the causes. If you are an adult, find ways to invest in this work and introduce it to young people that you know.
So how about everybody getting out of their mute buttons? Just to say a warm thank you for being with us this morning. And really appreciate you, DeNora, and love the work of Do Something and can't wait to see where you take it. And really want to help along the way. Anything
Thank you,
we can do.
DeNora.
Thank you, DeNora, so much. I'm inspired.
Thank you, DeNora. I
Keep
want
the-
to just say how brilliant you are and how I'm inspired by your work. And I love the way you continuously take us back to the notion of inclusivity. And I will pay more attention to the way I characterize things as I speak because of your influence on that. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Jacqueline.
I have to say, your obviously your focus on young people gives me so much hope, because it seems like a very dire time for them, and empowering them to make change or know that they can make a change, I think gives us hope for our future. So thank you. I think you're doing just an amazing work and bringing a real gift to the young people of our world right now. So thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it, Sarah. It's hard, right? I can't imagine what young people are facing as we navigate this once in a century, hopefully, experience. And what does it mean for them to like come out of this even stronger than they were, but also clear, if you will, about how they're going to live their lives for the better.
Yeah. I love,
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. I love your term of intersectional reckonings. I mean, that for me gives an understanding which allows hope. It's like, no, we're not just all crashing, without hope. It's that there are reckonings, they're all connected. And so there's work to do, just start somewhere and realize, it's going to be messy. It's going to be tough, but I love the advice on patience too, that stay in it, don't give up. Come on, we'll get through it. So thank you so much for all of that.
And you remind me of of this quote that I love, and you embody it, which is and inspire it with these kids, which is hope is a verb with its sleeves rolled up.
Yeah. Yep.
So you're
I love
getting
that.
us all to roll up our sleeves
And do something.
and do something.
Right.
Yes.
What happens when a woman takes power? What happens when she won't back down? What happens when a woman takes power? What happens? What happens? What happens when a woman takes power? What happens when she won't back